Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Bobotie. That's right, I'm going to show you my take on this amazing South African curry beef casserole, which, by the way, we're going to create just using one pan. And you'll probably never guess it, but I'm going to tell you later in the video what classic American comfort food this reminds me of. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by transferring some onions into some olive oil and butter that we have set over medium-high heat. And we'll also go ahead and add all our salt at this point, since when we saute onions, which is the first step here, that salt draws out moisture, which makes everything happen a little bit faster. And by the way, ideally you're going to do this in a pan we can transfer right into the oven, but you can also do this in any pan and then just transfer everything into a casserole dish. So it's not a deal breaker, but if you have one, an oven-safe pan is the way to go. And what we'll do after we saute those onions for a few minutes and they start to turn translucent is stop and add our spices, which will start with a big spoon of our favorite curry powder, or any curry powder you can get your hands on. We will also do a little bit of turmeric, some ground cumin, or cumin as some folks call it. We'll also do some freshly ground black pepper, followed by some dry oregano, which I'm not sure is authentic, but I like it, so I put it. And what we'll do is stir all this together and then saute this another minute or so, which, as you probably know, is going to wake up those spices and just make them a little more fragrant, and most people think a little more effective. And once that's been accomplished, we will stop and add the star of the show, a couple pounds of the best, freshest ground beef you can find. And we'll go ahead and start stirring that in, breaking it up into small pieces as we do. And I think lean beef would be fine for this. But in general, whenever I'm making a similar dish, I like to go with the 85% lean to 15% fat ratio, since that fat does give you a little bit of extra flavor. And probably more importantly, I think a better texture. But no matter which you use, like I said, we'll go ahead and stir that, breaking it up as we go, until eventually we've worked that into some fairly fine crumbles. And once our mixture looks a little something like this, we will stop and add the next set of ingredients, which will include 1 bay leaf, which is one of the key flavorings here. We will also toss in some tomato paste, plus a whole bunch of minced garlic, and then we'll stir all this together and cook it for about 2 minutes. Oh, and if that bay leaf looked a little bit different this time, it's because for this recipe we're using bay laurel instead of our usual Greek or Turkish bay leaf, since the bay laurel has a stronger flavor and a more pronounced fragrance, and that's the type recommended for this dish. But anyway, like I said, we'll cook that stirring for a couple minutes, at which point we'll stop and add almost all the rest of the ingredients, which will include some freshly squeezed lemon juice, plus some of the zest, since it does come free with the lemon. I also like to do a little splash of red wine vinegar, or any other vinegar you have, and we will follow that with a few dashes of Worcestershire sauce. And then last but not least, we will toss in some fruit chutney, and I'm using your very common Indian-style mango chutney. And that's it. We'll go ahead and stir that in and reduce our heat down to medium-low. And the amount of chutney you add depends on how sweet you want this dish, which can range from pure savory with no sweetness, all the way to super, super sweet. All right, I've seen recipes use like a half a cup of chutney, plus raisins, plus apricot jam, which for me is way, way too sweet. Okay, even with this modest amount I'm stirring in, the dish is fairly sweet. So of course you'll adjust that if you want. And then what we'll do once we have all that stirred in is just let this cook gently on medium-low for about 5 minutes while we prep our last 2 components. And for that, we will add 3 slices of white bread to a bowl, and we will pour over half a cup of nice cold fresh milk. And what we'll do is give that a quick toss to make sure those slices are fully saturated. And yes, it is recommended we cut the crust off the bread, since those tend not to break down, and you'll actually see chunks of crust in the final product, which is not the worst thing, but it's certainly not the best thing. And that's it. After 5 minutes, we will squeeze out the milk, and we will transfer that into our pan. And by the way, don't throw away the milk you squeezed out. We're going to use that in a minute. And what we'll do is go ahead and stir, mash, and smash that in until that bread pretty much fully disappears. And by the way, if you're making this for other people, try not to let them walk in the kitchen during this step. All right, this is one of those recipes that doesn't look good until it does. And then it looks spectacular. But at this point, if we're being honest, it's not a great look. And then what we'll do once that's fully mixed in is turn off our heat, and we'll smooth out the surface as evenly as we can. And we'll add 1 cup of milk to the bowl we soaked our bread in, along with 2 large eggs. We will also do a few shakes of cayenne, plus a nice big pinch of salt. At which point we'll take a whisk and mix this very, very thoroughly. And the reason we want to mix this very well is because I think we want a perfect golden crust over the top. And if we don't whisk in those egg whites thoroughly, you might see white streaks on the surface, which I might be the only person that bothers, but probably not. And that's it. After a very thorough and thoughtful whisking, we'll go ahead and pour that over the top of our meat. And we're going to do that semi-gently. All right, if we just dump this into one spot, the beef would move, and we'd have more of this beautiful custard in some spots than others. So we'll take a few extra seconds and pour that over gently. And then, as South African tradition dictates, we must top this with extra bay leaves. And I'm going to use 3, which I think is the bare minimum. But if you did want a more pronounced bay flavor, go ahead and add more. And that's it. This is now ready to transfer into the center of a 350-degree oven for about 45 minutes. Oh, and one tip, maybe place the bay leaves on after you put it in the oven, since they moved when I did that, and I had to reposition. But anyway, like I said, we'll cook that for about 45 minutes, or until it looks like this. Oh yeah, that is going to turn some heads. And that gorgeous appearance is only outdone by the incredible aroma you're going to get in your kitchen. I mean, this really does smell so incredible, and you're not going to be able to wait to dig in. Although I do like to let it sit for about 5 minutes before serving. So that's what I did before grabbing a spoon and serving some up. And that, my friends, if you enjoy curried anything, especially curried anything that has a little touch of sweetness to balance the spices, I think you're really going to love Bobotie. And as good as that meat filling would be on its own, when you combine it with that very thin, bay leaf-infused custard layer on top, it just brings everything together and really does make this a truly unique dish. And again, the flavor profile is definitely sweet. So if you are concerned about that, just add a tiny bit of that chutney and then give things a taste. And then you can always add more if you want some more sweetness. So as I said, that's something you might want to adjust, along with, of course, the spice amounts or exactly what spices you put in. I mean, you guys are, after all, the Marcus Samuelsson of how this should be done. Oh, and believe it or not, if you do a version that does have a little sweetness to it, this has a very similar vibe to Sloppy Joe. So if you're a fan of those, and who isn't, you're going to want to try this. And whether you tweak the recipe to your taste or make it exactly as shown, this is an easy, gorgeous, and extremely delicious one-pan meal. And I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.